Welcome back. Lesson 12. Make sure you go back up to the contents page and sign off for this lesson. Now, it's a fairly chunky dot point here today, similar to the one we did the other day. If I can find it. I think I've gone past it. This one here, where you're looking at a lot, like the syllabus has just listed a bunch of things. So here they've listed age, class, ethnicity, gender, location, sexuality. Here we have listed family, peer groups, media, marketers, governments, and global groups. Now, with this syllabus dot point, there are, with the global groups point, I just need to touch on something here. And with sitcoms, the global groups component fits in with our media. So, forgot to chuck that in before I edited it there. So if you guys can put that in, because when we're looking at media, we're looking at social media and we're looking at things like fan pages of sitcoms can be counted as a global group there. So it's really handy that those two sort of meld into one. Like so many of these dot points for this topic do, because we've picked a good topic. So in breaking down this dot point, we're looking at stakeholders and how they influence the popular culture. So these are all the stakeholders that the syllabus has outlined, and we are going to look at each of these. Now, a word on, or a quick definition of what a stakeholder is, if you want to draw a line up here so we can define it, a little arrow. So a stakeholder is someone who has a vested, so write this down, someone who has a vested interest. So a stakeholder being someone that has a vested interest in something means that they have something to gain from it, okay? Whether that's money, whether it's entertainment. In our case with sitcoms, they're the two main things. So stakeholders are people that can influence or are influenced by sitcoms as well, but they definitely have, like we said, that vested interest. They have something to gain from it, otherwise there would be no point in them consuming it or creating the content. So what happens here when we're looking at the control of sitcoms is that between these groups there's often conflict, and that will influence, or that will change how that stakeholder influences the sitcoms. And so that's what we've done here in this neat little table here, is that we've referenced all of these key stakeholders that are being talked about here, and then we're looking at how they influence sitcoms. So the family, I'll start from the top, influences sitcoms in the way that they can affect consumer choice, okay, and what sitcoms you want. And that, if you want to draw a little arrow here, is due to beliefs and values. So as we looked at last lesson with this example of Homer, a lot of parents particularly having the authority in their household will not allow their children to watch certain sitcoms if it does not align with their beliefs or values, and they won't watch it on their own if they're of mature age enough anyway, if they're not reflective of their own beliefs and values. So that can affect the type of sitcoms that you watch. You can also find as well, on the flip side, so that's relating to that first point. On the flip side, typical family values can influence sitcoms, and they're reflected in the shows that focus on that family dynamic or setup. So things like Modern Family or Everybody Loves Raymond, the family as a stakeholder group influences the type of content that gets on that sitcom because it has to mirror their reality. Okay, so the idea is that all the menial entertainment punchlines and jokes that feature within those familiar sitcoms are stuff that ideally that consumers experience in their own life as a family unit, albeit theirs is probably a bit more eccentric. But that's how they influence. If families operate in a different way, then their content would change to reflect their own personal values. So that's family. Peer groups is our second one. So very, very similar. The exact point that we used for family as our first one is identical for peers. So it affects the consumer choice and what sitcoms you watch, again based on the beliefs and values of that peer group. The only thing I will add, and if you want to add here as a direct line, is that it's not particularly driven, well, it is driven by beliefs and values, but it's also driven by peer pressure. whether that's explicit or inexplicit peer pressure. Now, I'm not saying that, friends might bully you for not watching a certain sitcom, or that they may, I don't know. But the idea that if your whole social group is talking about a particular sitcom, that's like an inexplicit peer pressure for you to engage in that because you want to be part of that culture within your peer group. So that's an example there of how peers can influence sitcoms. Again, their values and identities will shape that. So when you see sitcoms based at a much younger audience than yourselves, and things like iCarly or Hannah Montana, those types of shows are trying to reflect the typical early teen experience. And then as you get older, there are sitcoms that will reflect your experience a bit more. So things like Summer Heights High is an example of a sitcom that might reflect your age bracket in general. So that's one there. The second example here is that peers can really or particularly influence a person's type of humor, because especially as an impressionable young teen, you're more likely to follow your peers' lead at some stage than you are your parents' lead. So they almost become a dominant socialization agent there. So the buzz at workplaces or even in schools at your age can really revolve around the show. And similarly to the second point with family, in the workplace, the idea is that sitcoms like, for example, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, or any other sitcom that's based on workplace culture, needs to kind of reflect, to some extent, the workplace culture that they're representing, to get more viewers and engage and buy in. Third one here, marketers and producers. Now, I've put producers in here. The syllabus technical word is marketers, but they're basically producers is what we're looking at. So the people who get all the money from the show, or most of the money from the show, because they're also investing most of the money in the show. So Adweek reports that an advertisement company are paying on average $300,000, that's US dollars by the way, per 30-second ad break during prime time TVs. So things like Big Bang Theory or Modern Family in the US are huge. People who are advertising and paying about 300 grand a pop. So you imagine one ad break is like millions of dollars worth of revenue that the network and that the producers are getting from that. So it's a lot of money. Now, if we're looking at, I don't even know how much it would cost, but it would be interesting to find out that how much Netflix might pay to get all the seasons of Friends, for example, and how much more might they pay to have it exclusively on there. So how much did Binge pay, for example, to get that Friends reunion on their network only? That would be very interesting to note. If anyone finds out, that would be very cool to know, but I assume it would be millions and millions of dollars. So the idea that marketers can influence the sitcoms because of the type of and producers, because they're the guys making most of the money, they can influence the content that goes on it because they're making so much money from it, as we can see there. Friends reruns as well are approximately still making about $1 billion a year, which is insane, and each cast member raking in approximately a tenth of that in total, which $20 million each year, which is just insane. So you can see the effect that, because most of those cast members bought into the show towards the end of it as producers as well, so they're getting a real nice slice of the cake there as well. Again, those stakeholders are influencing the sitcom because they have a vested interest in it. The government, particularly, and how they influence sitcoms is that they create and enforce censorship laws that can restrict the availability of particular episodes. We will look at this a bit more next lesson, but the government, for example, creates all these guidelines in Australia, and the sitcom, you have to think, has to meet the guidelines for an Australian audience, but each country has different guidelines as well. So what might be PG in America might be M here in Australia, and vice versa. So they've got to be careful of being that global audience as well, and making sure that it is acceptable enough to be viewed around the globe as well. So governments are that macro level institution. That's one reason, an area that they might control it. And then there's also another one in terms of censorship. So what censorship means, if you want to put a little arrow down, is the suppression of something. So when you're censoring something, you are removing it or taking it away or suppressing it. So this was seen, and a lot of governments do it with certain sitcoms. This is really prevalent in the Simpsons episode. So there was an old Simpsons episode prior to the 9/11 attacks on America where Homer needed to go to the toilet. He went to one tower, went all the way to the top floor. There was no toilet because it was out of order. So he ran all the way back down, ran across, ran up the other tower, and then went to the toilet. Since the 9/11 attacks, they no longer air that episode in the US out of respect for the victims there. So that's one example of a particular government suppressing or censoring a certain sitcom. Other countries around the world do it as well. So Saudi Arabia, for example, have banned Modern Family because of how they portray same-sex marriage and the role of women within the show. And I think they have their own version of it. I can't remember what it's called though. So that's an example of how governments can censor that. Other things like South Park and Family Guy, for example, are banned in pretty much every Asian country because of how racist they are towards that ethnicity. And so that's an example of how governments can influence sitcoms. And then our last one, which is the media and global groups, as they're one of the same with our particular case study. So sitcoms are able to use their influential power to promote the show, associated paraphernalia and products. So through media and advertising, they affect the sitcoms by getting people to watch it through ad streaming and revenue, through paraphernalia and products that they may sell and advertise there as well. Actors and actresses are also able to post photos or videos to engage with their fans and followers at a global level to help promote sitcom viewership. So that's how they would influence it. They're trying to increase the access and the hype so that people still continue to engage and watch the sitcoms. So you think every time there's a Friends actor that's getting interviewed, without fail that they always talk about a reference to a Friends episode. And so you can see that that's still ongoing even when the show is no longer airing. And then the last one here is that consumers can also use social media and send messages to interact with their favorite sitcoms, and that might influence the sitcom as well. Like say, for example, if there is a particular episode that gets dropped and consumers are really unhappy with something, they can post all about it on social media, and then that can influence the type of content that's then shown on the sitcom in future episodes and things of that nature. Likewise, if it's something they really enjoy, they'll try and mimic that to gain more followers. And that, my friends, is lesson 12. Thank you.